Can you see my presentation?
Yes, wonderful.
Yes, I'll talk today about chemistry of light-absorbing aerosols from biomass burning. Before I'll start talking about our projects on this topic, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Vera Samburova. I am from the Desert Research Institute. Before Desert Research Institute, I finished my master's degree in Moscow State Lomonosov University in Russia, in Moscow in 2002. Then I went to the Switzerland, to ETH Zurich, and I did my PhD and finished it in 2007. It was Swiss work on organic aerosols, on urban organic aerosols, my dissertation. And then I came to Reno, to the Desert Research Institute, as a postdoc, and since then I'm working as first assistant research professor. Now I'm associate research professor at DRI. For 6 years, I was also the program director of the Atmospheric Sciences graduate program at University of Nevada, Reno. So I work with the students a lot. And here I just highlighted, I don't know why it's going by itself. Highlighted my major research interests, mainly speciation and characterization of organic compounds in the atmosphere, both gas phase and particle phase. Also, I work a lot on development of analytical methods for analysis of organic species, and not only in the atmosphere, but also in other environmental samples. Also, one of my research interests to analyze chemical compounds in biomass burning and vehicle emissions, semi-volatile, volatile. You can see my picture. We also did a really interesting few projects actually at the cannabis grow facilities because in Reno we do have quite a bit of them, and we were analyzing volatile organic compounds which are emitted from grow facilities. The concentrations of volatile organic compounds are huge there, and we were trying to estimate what's their effect on air pollution in Reno, and as well on the formation of ozone, because as we all know, ozone is a toxic compound when it's in the tropospheric level. And we found out that the cannabis grow facilities don't contribute a lot to the air pollution, so we have them around. I also did quite a bit of work on analysis of toxic species in electronic cigarettes. And a few years ago, Hans and we started to work quite a bit on the chemistry of post-fire soils. And I will talk a little bit about it today. So by the end of my presentation, I hope we will be able together to answer the question, why do we care about organic compounds in the air? And here, major question, what are the sources of these compounds? Two major groups. Probably most of you know that we have anthropogenic emissions into the atmosphere, biogenic emissions into the atmosphere, and main sources of anthropogenic emissions, car emissions, domestic wood burning, prescribed wildfires, and gas and fuel storages. On the other hand, we also have biogenic emissions. Nature also emits a lot of air pollutants. We have volcanic emissions, which it's really hard to control. We cannot control them. We have wildfires, and so on and so forth, and forest as well, and ocean. So everything emits something into the atmosphere. So we have a lot of different compounds that going into the air, and we can classify them different ways. We can have organic or inorganic compounds. We have volatile, semi-volatile, non-volatile compounds. We have toxic, non-toxic compounds. Very important classification. Also water-soluble, non-water-soluble. Since we have water in the atmosphere, we also need to know what compounds can go into the water droplet, what compounds cannot, because then their deposition will depend if it will be dry deposition or wet deposition. So very important to study, when we study this soup of compounds in the air, that we also understand clearly what are their properties as well. And organic compounds, those are not organic compounds, what we think in the stores. Organic compounds, organics in the stores, a good thing. Organics in our labs, as you all know, mostly bad things, mostly toxic. So just a quick reminder here. Biomass burning. Why biomass burning? Biomass burning or wildfires or prescribed fires or domestic wood burning, any combustion can emit a lot of compounds, inorganic and organic compounds in different phases, gas phase and particle phase into the atmosphere. This picture is taken in 2010 in Russia when there were when it was in 2010, it was really bad and dry summer. And we had really bad peat fires around Moscow, in the Moscow region, and it was really bad year for us. And here are a few pictures that my friends sent to me. So you can see the actually near Kremlin, Red Square, that it was really bad air quality, and actually the death rate was really high in Moscow back then when it was 2010. People still remember that time. So the air quality, because of the peat burning, peat fires, were really bad. And what's really hard about peat fires, it's really hard to put them down. Peat is burning and smoldering slowly. It can go deep into the soil. And my dad told me that even when he went in the winter in the forest, he saw how the peat smoke was coming out from the snowpack. So it means that peat was burning even during the winter in the deep below in the ground, and the emissions were going out during the winter through the snowpack. Not going too far, we also have a lot of air pollution episodes caused by wildfires around the Reno area in Nevada. You can see here the Lake Tahoe, where Lake Tahoe is, and you cannot even see where Reno is supposed to be because it was huge fire in 2013. Maybe some of you heard about it. It was fire in Yosemite Park. It's called Rim Fire, and Reno was in a complete smoke for straight 2 months. So it was really bad episode. The fire was huge, and because of the winds, which are mainly going from southwest and southwest, we have mainly winds here in Reno. What we had really bad air and long air pollution episode in Reno as well in 2013. It's another example, 2021, we have a number of really big and long fires as well. In Northern California, this is our Reno Gazette Journal reference. It's our local journal here in Reno, reported that in 2021 in California, there were more than 2 million acres burned, 2 million acres of wildfires. And here I can show on the right picture, you can see where the fires occurred in California, and you can see the border with Nevada, and Reno is I think Reno is somewhere here. Hans, you can correct me if I'm wrong. So, and we had actually 3 major fires in 2021, not that long time ago. And one of the fires was the second in the California history largest fire. It was the Dixie Fire. You can see it here. And Dixie Fire, it was approximately 3,800 square kilometers fire. At the same time, we also had a Caldo fire over here, and we also, next to the Davis Lake, we had a Beckworth fire. It is not on this picture. So just in 2021, we had a lot of major fires which affected the air quality in Nevada. And you can see, like Poor Bear, it was picture taken in the where the Caldo fire happened. You can see here, which was 900 square kilometers. And of course, you can imagine what's the air quality in Reno area when we have so many fire emissions which are going to Nevada. And we actually describe these fires and their nature in our recent paper that we published in 2023 in the collaboration with our German group with Professor Ralph Zimmermann. So, however, I want to talk more today about the chemistry of biomass burning emissions, specifically about organic compounds and biomass burning emissions. And in our group here in Desert Research Institute, we actually run a number of the projects, and I will present two major projects that we're having here at DRI. The first project was happening in 2016. Being affected by air pollutants from wildfires, we wrote a proposal to the National Science Foundation in the US, and we got it funded. Radiata Valley was the PI of the proposal on the analysis of organic compounds in gas phase and particle phase, emissions from combustion of different fuels under control conditions. And control conditions means the combustion chamber that we have here at DRI. I will show you the picture later. So the idea is to perform different types of combustion, flaming and smoldering. And most of you probably know what's the difference between flaming and smoldering combustions. The flaming combustions typically happen when we have enough oxygen in the system, when we have fuel that have the open flames, the temperature of this combustion is typically higher. And the smoldering combustion, when we don't have enough oxygen supply, when we have lower temperature burning, and typically smoldering combustion is very characteristic combustion for the peat fuel. So when we have peat fires, you saw on the picture before, the peat fires around Moscow, this is a typical example of the smoldering combustion. It goes slower. If we have quite a bit of products of incomplete combustion, and we in this project decided to study both phases, flaming and smoldering, of the biomass burning emissions under controlled conditions. You can find more about smoldering and flaming combustion in Hans's paper in 2009. He published it with his former PhD student Rajan Chakrabarty, who is a big professor right now in the US. So smoldering combustion is also very big source of so-called brown carbon or brown aerosols. Brown carbon, these are emissions or aerosols or compounds that the light absorbing organic matter in aerosols. This is what we call brown carbon. Brown carbon strongly absorbs in the blue and near ultraviolet part of the solar spectrum. And the idea of our project was to analyze brown carbon in the emissions of flaming and smoldering combustion sources. So here you can see the filter that we collected with midwall in the lab, and you can see it's definitely brown carbon emissions. This filter was collected when we were burning the peat. Why it is important? You're probably all familiar with this IPCC report, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, and you can see on the biomass burning, oops, I don't know why this doing it when I'm using my mouse, in the biomass burning chart here, and fossil and biofuel, we see fossil and biofuel emits a lot of black carbon that affects, of course, air pollution, air and the snow. But the biomass burning can also emit the organic carbon, which can be also brown carbon. And the goal of our project was study the brown carbon. And as you can see, the arrow bars are huge on both columns there, and our job is to figure out what is brown carbon, how much brown carbon aerosols can be emitted from different fuels, from flaming combustion and from the smoldering combustion. So you can see our combustion chamber, Francisco and Ximena, when you visited us, you probably saw it. It's quite large. Combustion chamber is almost 2 meters by 2 meters metal box, pretty much. And you can see here the sampling line that going from the top. And typically what we do, we open the door and loading our fuels and burning them. And then we can connect our sampling lines with different instruments, including filter sampling. And you can see what we did as online analysis and offline analysis. Several papers were published based on this research. My role in this research was to collect filters, TIGF filters, to do chemical speciation like semi-volatile organic compounds, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, alkanes with gas chromatography mass spectrometry or GCMS. After the filters, we also collected the XAD cartridges. The XAD resin is a special resin that can catch semi-volatile organic compounds, which we also analyzed with the gas chromatography mass spectrometry. And in this talk, I will mainly focus on analysis of pHs, because pHs, as we find out and as we know, are part of the brown carbon aerosols. You can find the results of this research in the references, which is shown here. In our lab, we perform analysis of over 100 polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. Typically, the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency in the US, analyzing 16 pHs. In our lab, we analyze over 100, sometimes 113, sometimes 118, depending on the project. And we decided to run all our collected filters and XAD samples with the GCMF method on quantitative analysis of pHs and figure out how much pHs contribute to the brown carbon of the combustion aerosols that we generated in the lab. You can see on the left side is the flaming combustion case. On the right side is the smoldering combustion. On the left side, you can see clearly open flame. We were burning ponderosa pine needles, and ponderosa pine is a very common, ponderosa pine forest is a very common forest for the Western US and the Northern America altogether, north and western part of the America. On the right side, actually smoldering is going on. However, you can barely see the smoke there, but it is there. You can see how our chamber looks like. We have the balance below, balance sitting right under the ceramic discs to protect the balance from the heat. And we could measure every few seconds, we could measure how much mass actually going into the gas and particle phase aerosol. So we controlled how much fuel was actually consumed by the flame over there. Here's an example of the non-collected, on the left, non-collected and collected filters. And you can see on the right side, you can see on the bottom, unburned peat that we used and burned peat. You can see our setup that to burn the peat, we used the pot, which is isolated with the isolation material. And the goal for it is that in the nature, when we have the fire, typically the piece of this peat has the relatively high temperature around it. So this way we are trying to mimic the peat combustion in the nature by using the isolation material. So we applied it for the peat burnings quite a bit. Our students also, graduate students back then, also collected real fire aerosols, combustion aerosols. We used for this purpose, we used the medium volume sample, which we actually loaded right on the roof of the Desert Research Institute. You can see how DRI looks like. This is the road that we have that goes to DRI, and you can see that it's pretty polluted episode that we had in Reno. You can barely see the mountains. In a typical clear day, we see beautifully the mountains. And what we did, we also collected real fire emissions to compare with our combustion chamber experiments as well. An example of the peat burns, here we burned also Siberian peat. Siberian peat, which was actually an amazing fuel because, as you know, especially now, it's not easy to bring from Russia anything. However, we managed to get the fuel from Russia, and 25% that you see on this note is 25% of the water content of the peat. We were also controlling the water content of the fuel to have somewhat representative samples. And after we burn the peat, you can see that it's beautiful yellow filter on the right, top right. And this is the fraction of the brown carbon in the combustion emissions, in the combustion aerosols. On the top one, on the bottom picture, with my colleague Adam Watts, he started the burns with the torch. He heated it up first, and then we had 10 seconds to put it on fire. So when it was smoldering, and this is how we collected our samples for future analysis. I don't want to go too much into detail, just a quick note, what fuels we used to collect our samples. We had Siberian peat, we have Alaskan peat, Florida swamp peat, and these were the representative fuels for the smoldering combustion. And we have ponderosa pine and cheatgrass as flaming combustion fuels. Ponderosa pine, like I said, is very common vegetation in the Western US, whereas cheatgrass, it's actually invasive vegetation. And I can even see right now from my window that our hills are covered with the cheatgrass, and it's extremely flammable with the water content way below 1%. It's extremely dry and can start fires pretty quickly. We collected our samples with the water content when they were dry, and we collected with the controlled water content when they were 25 or 50% for the peats, and we typically use the natural water content fuels to burn as ponderosa pine and cheatgrass for the flaming combustion. So this is just overall what samples we collected, and then we performed the first sampling, then we did the extraction with the accelerated solvent extractor, where we used two types of solvents, polar and non-polar, for sure extract polar species and non-polar species in the collected samples. Then we concentrated the samples with the rotary evaporator to 1 mil. Then we concentrate them even more under ultra high pure nitrogen up to like 50 microliters, and we perform quantitative analysis of polar compounds, alkanes, alkenes, alkynes, and pHs. But we'll talk about pHs in this presentation, since pHs are part of the brown carbon fraction. And here the first slide of our results. On the left, you can see top 10 particle phase pHs, particle phase particles that were collected on the filters. And on the right side, on the B picture figure, you see gas phase, top 10 gas phase polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons that we analyzed in our 5 different fuels. Clearly, you can see that the gas phase signature pHs are very different from the particle phase pHs, while in the particle phase, the pHs, the majority of them were dimethylphenanthrenes, as you can see in the blue, perinaphthenone, and we also have retin and pyrene, so quite large polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, whereas on the gas phase, or B picture, we see light pHs, typically 2-ring pHs, substituted pHs like 1-methylnaphthalene, 2-methylnaphthalene. We have quite a bit of naphthalene in Alaskan peat, Siberian peat, and Florida swamp peat. So we got these signature pHs. The next step was to understand how much these pHs contribute to the light absorption of brown carbon aerosols. And this is what we did. In order to understand and to quantify their contribution to the brown carbon light absorption, what we did, our student, Jessica Connolly, she prepared the standards of every single pH that we have in the lab, and we have over 100 pHs, and she analyzed them and on the spectrophotometer in Hans's lab to see how pHs absorb the light. And as you can see, we took some of them here, that majority of pHs absorb really well in the visible range of the spectrum, and they are absorbed differently. So some pHs have maximum in the visible range of the spectrum, maximum around 400 nanometers wavelengths. Some pHs have maximum closer to 450. So different pHs contribute differently. The takeaway message from this plot is that by analyzing just 1 or 2 or even 16 pHs in gas and particle phase biomass burning emissions will not give us an answer what's the contribution of pHs to the brown carbon aerosols, to their absorption properties. And then we split the pHs from the gas phase and particle phase. So here you can see the most efficient light absorbing brown carbon pHs identified in a particle phase and in the gas phase emissions. So we again selected the top 10 pHs that we identified in the particle phase and the gas phase, and we actually calculated based on their concentration that we identified in our samples. We calculated how much they contributed to the brown carbon, to the absorption, to the light absorption properties of the emissions. And here the pie charts that show the contribution of top 10 brown carbon pHs to the total particle phase pH absorptivity. As you can see, Alaskan peat, Siberian peat, and swamp peat, even between the fuels, different pHs contribute differently. For Alaskan peat and swamp peat, perinaphthenone was one of the major contributors to the brown carbon, while for Siberian peat, it was 1-methylpyrene. So the important thing is to analyze this huge list of the pHs and figure out what's their contribution to the brown carbon. For the flaming combustion, you can see that again, perinaphthenone is one of the major contributors to the brown carbon. And when you dissolve perinaphthenone, I don't know if we have chemists in the audience, you probably see that it's quite yellow compound. And majority of pHs, especially high molecular weight pHs, are quite yellow in color when we prepare the standards. We can also see that methylpyrenes and methylfluorantine in ponderosa pine needle, one of the largest contributors to the light absorption, which is really interesting to observe. When we see the contribution of the top 10 brown carbon pHs in the gas phase, they're quite different from the particle phase. The pie charts look very different. In the gas phase, when we're talking about brown carbon, we can definitely see that aceanaphthalene is one of the major contributors. And like I said, substituted naphthalenes as well, like trimethylnaphthalene, 2-methylnaphthalenes are major contributors. And again, between the fuels, the signature of pHs which are emitted and which are affected, the light absorption properties are quite different. The second project is when we have our aerosols and gas phase compounds from the biomass burning emitted into the atmosphere. Of course, the atmospheric chemistry going on. We have huge source of light, sun in the atmosphere. We have other compounds in the atmosphere. We have OH radicals, we have ozone, we have nitrogen oxides, we have organic compounds that can actually react with biomass burning emissions. And our next project was focused on the comparison of fresh and aged biomass burning emissions under laboratory conditions and compare the absorption properties of these emissions, fresh and aged. On the picture, you can see very simple experimental setup. It's a oxidative flow reactor where we have, it's actually a pretty simple tube that has 4 UV lamps inside. And those UV lamps, when you have the presence of water, they can generate the OH radicals. The lamps were at 254 nanometers and 185 nanometers, quite aggressive environment inside of the chamber. But this is the idea, to create the environment inside of chamber when our compounds will react and will age in approximately 2 minutes. That will represent around 1 week in the atmosphere. So the idea is we generate the combustion emissions in the nearby room, in the combustion chamber, and then in the wall over there we have a hole, and we'll have the sampling line that goes into the aging chamber in the oxidative flow reactor, where we have all these reactants inside, and these reactants react with our emissions. This way we collect fresh and aged biomass burning emissions, and we can compare their chemical composition as well as their absorptive properties. So the objectives of this project was to compare flaming and smoldering, compare their light absorbing properties. We also perform polar and non-polar extracts to see what kind of compounds, polar or non-polar, contribute to the absorption properties of the emissions, and also comparing fresh and biomass burning emissions, what's going on with their light absorption when they're aged, when fresh emissions aged in the chamber. So the goal was measurements of light absorbing compounds in different extracts, polar and non-polar, in fresh and aged biomass burning emissions under control conditions. For this purpose, we used different, again, type of fuels. We used Florida peat, Siberian peat, and the smoldering representative, and we used flaming combustion. FASMI, it's typically a boreal forest. FASMI is the Fire and Smoke Modeling Evaluation Campaign that happened in the US, and you can see the FASMI fuel here. It's name of the campaign, but we call this fuel as a FASMI fuel. And we also use the fuel from the Hocken fire. It's semi-arid area of the US, and this is how we name our combustion experiments pretty much. So again, we had flaming and smoldering, and this is experimental setup. It's well described in Chiranjeevi Bhattarai and Deepsing Gupta, our former PhD students, in their publications. We have combustion chamber. Of course, we have to modify our humidify our emissions. So we have the water in the system to create OH radicals. And then before the oxidative flow reactor, we collected quartz filters and we collect TIGF filters for chemical analysis of biomass burning aerosols. When we collected XAD resin to analyze semi-volatile organic compounds, and we had exactly the same setup for aged emissions, when we have aged aerosols and we have also aged semi-volatile compounds. And we have the set of ozone scrubbers after that, when we perform also online measurements with different online instruments, but we are not talking about that today. You can see here our back then PhD students. On the left, Deepsing Gupta, in the middle is Chiranjeevi Bhattarai, and they performed and set up all those experiments. We again performed extraction with, in this case, it was hexane, but we used different solvents. We used also ultrasonication bath, and we performed solid phase extraction to analyze high molecular weight or organic compounds and their contribution to the light absorption. Here you can see our filters on the left. We extract them with polar and non-polar solvents and analyze them with the lambda spectrophotometer and collected the spectra between 200 and 2300 nanometers to estimate the brown contribution of aerosols to the brown carbon. Here the first set of the results, and I want to go further into it. We calculated, this is how we process our data from the spectrophotometer. We integrated all the spectra based on the solar spectrum, applying solar spectrum, and then we calculated the total absorbance. And the first set of our results showed that for the Florida peat emissions, that non-polar fraction of organic compounds contribute more more into the absorption rather the polar fraction that we extracted from the Florida peat emissions. We also find out that aged emissions are less absorbing than the fresh emissions for the Florida peat, as you can see here highlighted with the arrows. In case of flaming combustion, or FASMI in this case, you can also observe hexane and water emissions, fresh and aged. What's interesting about flaming combustion, especially FASMI fuel, what we found out that the aged emissions, a polar fraction, actually had more absorption than the fresh emissions. And it's very interesting when we look at the spectra, we see that aged emissions had some sort of absorption maximum in the visible range of the spectrum, and we think this is what's caused that the aged emissions from the FASMI burning contributed more. And we actually don't know, still don't know what's, from the chemistry point of view, why did it happen. We also found out that the flame combustion emissions altogether are more absorbing, fresh and aged, rather than smoldering combustion emissions. And we speculated in our papers that it's most likely due to high nitrogen oxide during the combustion. And in order to figure out if it's true or not, we sent our samples to Lynn Mazzolini group, and they perform ultra high resolution mass spectrometry measurements of our extracts. And I don't want to go into much into details, but on the top of the zero of the baseline, we see the compounds in the fresh emissions, and on the bottom here, or in negative scale, we see the same compounds which are in the aged emissions. And by the color, we can see what kind of molecules they are: CHO molecules that contain carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, CHNO, CHOS, or CHNOS compounds. And you can see that in Siberian pit and Florida pit, quite a bit of CHO compounds formed after the oxidation. At the same time, when we look at the FASMI and Hawking fire or flaming fuel combustion, we see a lot of formation of the nitrogen-containing compounds during the aging, CHNO compounds. And this is probably the reason why we see a quite high absorption in the aged emissions in the flaming combustion fuels. I don't want to go into great details here. Hans can talk about it, but we also compare our results with the other studies when the very specific compounds were aged and brown carbon was, especially Leo papers, was generated. And our data, which are in the lines here, dashed lines and solid lines, actually correlate pretty well even with some specific brown carbon species which were analyzed by other scientists. I don't know how much time I have. I have a few more slides just to add into it. So we all know that biomass burning emissions are important to study climate, to study the health. And the next step in studying climate is to study more of the brown carbon compounds, because our calculations showed that polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons actually contributed less than 3% into the brown carbon absorption. It means that we are missing a large group of compounds, for example, humic-like substances or some other species or nitrogen-containing species that contribute to the brown carbon. So it's still an open question and quite a large gap in our knowledge. What are organic brown carbon organic compounds? Also, what's important, and this is what Hans highlighted, to study how these compounds also affect the snow. You all saw this case in the New Zealand when fires from Australia affected the glacier's color in New Zealand. And Hans already mentioned the paper that Nick Barris published with Hans together on deposition of the brown carbon on snow. And this is another important question to study. Another important question is to study polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons in the air, because they do affect our DNA. You can see pH sitting right in the middle of DNA. It mutates it, and when we have mutated DNA, unfortunately, it can cause cancer. So this is why I tell always my students, they are sometimes asking, what's better, to smoke cigarette or e-cigarette, or if we have wildfire outside? The best for human is to breathe clean air. When you don't have pHs, when you don't have ozone, and you have nice and clean air, right? And we calculated the carcinogenic properties of different pHs. You can also find in some of our publications to highlight the importance to study organic compounds. It's another important question, how the biomass burning emissions contribute to the ozone formation, especially in the urban areas when we have nitrogen oxides. And you know that combination of organic compound, nitrogen oxides, and the sun is a great soup to create the ozone, which is toxic at the tropospheric level and can affect, as you can see, our lungs, right? So this is another step what we need to do to check. And now is why we can answer at least partially the question, why do we care about organic compounds in the air? Because first of all, it's a complex question. Second, organics do affect aerosol absorption properties, gas phase properties in the air, as well as the toxicity, and they can as well affect the snow. So I would like to thank my colleagues who helped to run all this very interesting research, Deep, Chiranjeevi, former students, Jessica, master student Hans, thank you very much, Adam Watts, my colleague, and Andrei Klistov. And I hope, guys, you have enough coffee and not sleeping, right? This is all what I have for today. And I'm ready to answer your questions, if there are any.
Thank you very much, Vera, for your presentation. This is a beautiful overview about the organic compounds in the world of the chemistry. And this is maybe I am the alone here in the chemistry world, but we apply the chemistry in the environment, especially in the area that you show the effect of the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon. This is the pH. When you not so understand what is the pH, it's the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon. This is a huge family of compound of organic, so aromatic ring that is so ubiquitous in the atmosphere. And that is a beautiful overview about the role of the pHs in different aspect of the environment. Thank you for your presentation. And now questions. Come in. You guys hear me?
Yes.
So my first question is about the project one. What is the center of the brown carbon, such as in the black carbon is the soot?
Percentage of brown carbon. Can you repeat it one more time, the last sentence?
The center, it's like in the black carbon, the center is the soot particle. It is added to the organic compounds. So in the brown carbon, what is the center in this case?
Okay, it actually depends on the chemical functional group. If we're talking about pHs, is there when we have a fused or connected double bonds in the aromatic ring, this will create the color. Or especially if we have quinones, when you have connected C double bond O, C double bond O, and some aromatic rings attached, it's also very good functional group that creates the brown color in the sample. However, not only pHs, I don't want you to get the wrong idea that only pHs contribute to the brown color. We also can have nitrogen-containing compounds or PANs, so the so-called PAN, when we have peroxyacyl nitrates, COO, and then nitrate group, that can also be pretty brown. It's typical compound in the urban area. When we have car emissions, we have a lot of nitrogen oxides, organic compounds. We don't expect to see a lot of them in the biomass burning, but they also a big part of the brown carbon compounds. So brown carbon compounds are very complex mixture, complex soup of compounds and different functional groups that can give a brown color. In the case of the combustion emissions, we started with pH because we know that combustion emissions do have pHs. However, we figure out they are not the majority of the fraction. There are some other species that create a brown color. So we need to study them more. I hope I answer your question. Good question.
It's good for me. And so that is the reason for the study of the organic compounds are the main reason for the absorbing properties of the brown carbon.
Yes.
Yes, that's one of my questions.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, the idea, maybe the idea from Vera is very clever, but you intend to make an atlas from different compounds that absorbing in different colors. You can take maybe the idea to have a blue black carbon, blue carbon, or a yellow black carbon, or a yellow carbon, or a green carbon.
So, yeah.
This is
Algae,
depending of the-
red carbon. Yeah.
Exactly. It's very interesting. Other question? Okay. Thank you very much again,
Thank you.
Vera, and see you again. Yeah.
Yes, I hope so too. Yes.